understand sometimes when we read from prepared notes, you know, people become a little lulled. And what I'm not going to do is talk too long, because I want to be able to have a conversation with you, because I know that's why you came here, right? To ask questions, but to also provide me with information so that I'm able to go into those spaces and talk about these issues so that they are relevant for our young people who are entering into college classrooms. So let me say that I've spoken a lot about slavery and the Civil War, really all across this country. And I shared with the senator, before I came to Queens a year ago, I taught at Ole Miss in Oxford, Mississippi for 5 years. You might imagine, I was the only black woman in the department teaching about slavery. So I got a lot of invitations, especially when 2011 rolled around, because it was the beginning of what people call the sesquicentennial, or the commemoration of the 150th anniversary of the start of the Civil War, 2015 being the end. This is the first time I've ever been invited where the abolition of slavery has been at the center. And that's important, because when I was in Mississippi, even though it is the state with the largest black population outside of Washington, D.C., which is the capital, the central component that I was to discuss was the war. And so I would always have to inject black folk in and say, you do know there were 3.9 million people who looked like me who were dotted across the landscape of the South, and for them, it was about the abolition of slavery. And so I think that's a good starting point to talk about abolition. So you've heard a little bit about the documents, the formal documents. You've heard about the struggles of people working for the abolition of this unfair system that deals with mass incarceration. And this is wonderful, because what historians do is really trace moments and lives across time and space. And so abolition and abolitionism, the movement that comes out of wanting to end slavery, doesn't just begin at a certain date, right? So what I want to do is create a genealogical timeline, and that's something black folk are really good with, because in order for you to be able to trace your family, and the first time we were ever counted in an official census was 15 years before slavery starts, I think is incredible. So I always use that as a metaphor for kind of, you know, peeling back the layers. Abolitionism really begins when black folk realize they are in a different place and they are going to be in that new space, right, called the Americans for life. Right? And so you can imagine, you are metaphorically and figuratively and literally chained in this system of bondage. And what becomes the identifying marker is this thing here, hue. So abolitionism starts with the person who wants to become free. And so as you have these individuals who are thinking about freedom, before there really is a term for this movement, right? What do? They write books. They become educated. So the first book written by a person of African descent about abolitionism was, and there's some controversy of whether he was born in Nigeria or South Carolina, but the meat of what he says stands. It was Olaudah Equiano, right? And he literally is sold from, captured and sold into slavery in Africa, travels to Virginia, travels throughout the Caribbean being sold and resold. He finally gains his freedom. He writes a book. And so at this moment, abolitionism really starts formally with the flowering of literature and art, right? So you can never disconnect the political even from the artistic productions that black people are doing. And it becomes the template for all other slave narratives that were written almost 100 years later. Frederick Douglass, Harriet Jacobs, I mean, they're literally writing based on the model that Equiano gives them and gives the world. So then you start to have folk who are showing black exceptionality, because the racial science of the day, and not only am I a historian of slavery, but I also do history of medicine and science. The racial slavery is that black people are a subset of 8. Right? So you have folk like Phyllis Wheatley, and I know those are, that may be one of the names that's kind of trotted out during Black History Month, right? And they say, oh, she was a poet. But she was a poet who still connected a political message about slavery and its abolishment in her art, right, in her poetry. And so then you move further down and you realize abolitionism can't really exist in the South, because those folk are literally chained and bonded in the system of slavery. So for them, it's about rebellion and action. But in the North, that is, and this doesn't mean that slavery didn't exist in the North. Instead of it being a slave society, it was a society with slaves. Right? So there were still enslaved people living in the North, but the numbers were much smaller. So all of a sudden, because there was a space for black institution building to happen, you have one of the most important institutions outside of the black family. The black church is established in Philadelphia by Richard Allen, right? The African Methodist Episcopal Church. And that becomes the springboard where black abolitionists are able to create the black press, right? And it's always interesting to me, I tell my students, this is really the only country where things that are inanimate become racialized, right? Because the press is not a living, breathing thing, but all of a sudden, black people's response to their bondage racializes this thing. So the black church becomes a springboard for black schools, the black press, right? Black literature, also great orators come out of this tradition, and they are the ones that are doing exactly what Professor Carter Jackson talked about, pressing leadership, pressing people nationally, internationally, right? They're going to Europe. They are talking about, in a very real sense, can black men and women live in a country that doesn't recognize their humanity? So you start to have some of the first political movements and conventions in the late 18th century and 19th century where they're saying maybe we should return to Africa. Maybe we should move to Canada, Nova Scotia. Maybe we should go to Mexico and the Caribbean, right? They're talking about these things. And so it literally is a movement that you can trace from the first moment that people of African descent come here, right, until slavery ends. And so because I don't want to take up too much time, I told I have 7 to 10 minutes, and there's so much for me to say. That's why I'm talking real fast. So I want to have a whole lot of questions and answers. But let me just say this. I'm going to end with this. And I think this is really important. And I always emphasize this to my students. When the 13th Amendment is passed, ratified in December 1865, people tend to think it came out of nowhere. Now we know that abolitionists, both black and white, were pressing for the abolition of slavery. And the 13th Amendment really seals that in 1865. But let me just read, and Shoshana had the quotation up on the screen. It is very short, probably one of the shortest amendments. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. Ratified, thank you, December 6, 1865. So we literally commemorated that just about a week ago. This is the interesting thing. Now that's 1865. This short amendment was literally taken from the Northwest Ordinance. Why don't we learn about the Northwest Ordinance in school? I'm in college, and I went to 2 black colleges before UCLA, and I don't remember anybody emphasizing it. Northwest Ordinance, 1787. So you literally have 78 years prior to the 13th Amendment, and Article 6 of the Northwest Ordinance, you have this very same language. So what these white lawmakers do, right, under Abraham Lincoln's jurisdiction is take language that had already existed for Western territories. So this was nothing new, right? And so we need to be able to start to make these linkages, right? And as Shoshana said, and I think this is vitally important, especially someone like me who studies the 19th century in particular, I always tell folks, ain't nothing new under the sun, right? And it's right here for you. All you need is a library card or a computer, because I get all kinds of questions all the time. Can you help me find? Can you help me locate? Can I talk to you about my family? I mean, I get those kinds of calls and emails all the time. So it's literally a swipe and a phone call or a click away, right? To understand that this knowledge exists and that we can link it to movements that are literally, that we are awash in. So I lied. I said I was going to end it. I'll end it with this. I found out in doing research for this talk that a graduate student was incarcerated. Let me take that back because the language needs to be very, very specific. He was contained in a correctional facility, but he had not yet been convicted in the state of Vermont. So there were charges brought up on a domestic disturbance. So for 6 weeks, he is detained in a correctional facility. He was asked to work. This case is called, he was asked to work in the correctional facility in the laundry division. And so he didn't want to. The COs threatened him with solitary confinement. His name was McGarry. And so Finbar McGarry is forced to work for 25 cents an hour washing clothes. He contracts a bacterial infection. At the end of 6 weeks, the charges were dropped and he was not convicted. Because he was a doctoral student, he sues Vermont and the correctional facility because they had violated his 13th Amendment rights. So he's using the law from 1787 and 1865 to talk about a 21st century situation. So what happens? The court rules against him. His lawyer appeals. It is still ongoing. And so it was appealed, and the second court, the circuit court, says, wait a minute, this man actually has, there is enough evidence to show, right, that involuntary servitude should also be based on one's innocence, right, the premise that you are innocent. And so this should be interesting because this is a white man who's talking about the 13th of his 13th Amendment, right, being rights being violated. So I want to leave you with the importance of these old documents that we sometimes see, kind of see as not being applicable to our lives, but they are right before us, and the knowledge is always there. All right, so I welcome your comments and your questions during the Q&A. Thank you so much.
I don't think I can handle all of this knowledge. Now, before I move on, I just want to talk to the kids. You guys have library cards? Because you're going to go to the library, we're going to do some homework on all this history. Now, next on our list, I would like to bring out Dr. Michael Nanfi.
My colleagues will allow, and with the permission of the elders, I will take a cue from Sister Brown and Sister Owen and step forward. Is that okay? And I have to say, I was just enjoying watching these sisters operate. That is some pressure on me right there. Try to follow that. Thank you so much for your work. That is really beautiful the way they can break that down like that. That is really something. In 1963, Billy Taylor and Dick Dallas recorded a song that they wrote titled, "I Wish I Knew." The opening lyric of the song says, "I wish I knew how it would feel to be free. I wish I could break all the chains holding me." They recorded that song on November 12, 1963, and 10 days later, you all know what happened. President Kennedy was assassinated, casting a gruesome shadow over the decade of assassinations on American soil. Martin, Malcolm, Edgar 5 months earlier, RFK, our 4 little girls in the Birmingham church, Viola Liuzzo, Schwerner, Goodman, Cheney, Fred Hampton, Mark Clark, Che Guevara overseas, and so many more. Nina Simone, bless her beautiful revolutionary heart, recorded the song 4 years later in 1967, and those of you that know the tune, that's likely the version that you know. These young people died in hails of bullets and sometimes in white men's prisons. Today, 150 years after the end of the Civil War and that incredible April day when General Lee gave over his sword to General Grant in a Virginia courthouse, thinking a little about the deaths of these young people gives us an opportunity to think about the meaning of freedom. What freedom really is, what it looks like, how it walks and talks, and how it has loved and hurt and fought and swaggered throughout our history. I think one of the reasons we even talk about freedom at all is that most of us really don't have it. It's like courage or something like that. Courage is extraordinary because most of us don't do it. That's what Shakespeare's play Hamlet's all about. I'm an English professor. Read your Shakespeare stuff in there, even for us revolutionary people. We all like to believe we are free, and it is painful to admit that we aren't. But if we were really a free people and all of us acted like it, then we would not be in this mess we are in today. We would not allow the kind of insult and exploitation that is a daily part of all of our lives. You know it, and I know it. So we talk about freedom as something that we would like to have, as something to strive for, to wish for, just like in Billy Taylor's song. But I think in some ways our salvation lies in the fact that throughout our history we do have real examples of living free. Even if one of the indications of it is that living free often lands you in the cemetery, or up on a tree like Jesus, or at the end of a rope like John Brown. The prophetic tradition in many religions is full of people who died for a principle higher than themselves. To me, that is the look of freedom. In the 1790s, 70 years before the American Civil War, Henri Christophe and Jean-Jacques Dessalines and Toussaint Louverture and others transformed, trained, and led an army of enslaved people in Haiti in what became the singular example of enslaved Africans throwing out their enslavers. The Haitian Revolution remains an iconic historical moment for oppressed people, like a beacon of hope that tells us it can be done. But look at Haiti now. Haiti just might be the poorest country in the world. I am of Haitian descent. Any of you in here? Possibly the poorest country in the world. Do you think there is a connection? Of course there is. The French and Americans have brutally punished Haiti for the unforgivable sin of decisively opposing white slave masters. And they did that because what Haiti showed the black world is that it can be done. We could be free. And the Europeans had to squash any inkling of this. Even the smallest thought or dream in the mind or heart of an African person that they could be free. The 200 or 1,000 so black troops who fought in the Civil War. Is that your number, by the way, sisters? 200,000 a good number?
Mm-hmm.
Is that cool? You fight about these numbers sometimes. History books usually say about 156,000 or something like that, but I think it was closer to 200,000. 200,000 or so black troops who fought in the Civil War. They really turned the tide of that war, as Sister Jackson told us. They have a history that is still struggling to be told. You all may have seen the movie Glory that our sister professor mentioned. It's a useful film in many ways, even emotionally moving at times, very well done, beautifully acted, amazing soundtrack, Harlem Boys Choir's in there. It's a wonderful film if you haven't seen it. But it's got some serious flaws, some serious historical distortions. I have to say, my father had the privilege of studying with Sister Professor Jackson, and I believe you did this film in the class.
I did.
And so actually this analysis comes from her, because I'm stealing it from my father who took it from her.
It's okay, pay for it.
No personal property in real Marxism. Right? He loved that class, by the way. He still tells us all about it. Your teaching spread. The movie does have some serious flaws, some serious historical distortions, and I think it has to do with the way I'm building this idea of what freedom is. The film portrays the Massachusetts 54th as mostly made up of escaped slaves. Truth is that most of that regiment were free black men. Not only that, women in that regiment?
No one knew.
Not only that, those free black men were some of the roughest, toughest, most highly educated, brilliant, courageous black men around at the time. The kind of people who are honed to an anvil's edge by having to deal powerfully with a brutal daily existence. Those men fought fiercely, and many of them died for something that was about more than just winning some economic war. But even in 1989, when that film was released, Hollywood couldn't contemplate depicting black men as truly free kind of men, even though in many ways I think they were. And when we get into the worldwide freedom movements of the 60s and 70s, all of the assassinations of the women and men who opposed unjust authority speaks for itself. I've given you a little list earlier. We could kick around a much longer one if we wanted to. On a beautiful winter day in 1965, Ossie Davis eulogized Malcolm X in what has to be called a great piece of prose poetry. Davis called Malcolm our prince, our shining black prince who wasn't afraid to die because he loved us so. He was describing a free person, even though Malcolm lay dead, the victim of an assassin's bullet at the age of 39. I am grateful to these people who make this history. These people who lived free in the midst of incredible invalidation and insult and gave me a dream of living that way myself. These are my reflections on the 150th anniversary of the emancipation. The people who did all this, they actually answered the question. They responded to the challenge that Billy Taylor and Nina Simone asked of us. Many of them, they died young and they died violently. But I think they died free. Thank you.
Thank you once again, Dr. Nin.
When you're over 40, you forget things.
Then you can't see what you got.
Now, I just want you guys to think for a minute. Are we free? Something I think we're still striving for. But don't ask me, the other historians. Next on our list, I would like to bring out Anthony Benson.
How y'all doing? I guess I'm just kind of like used to share a little bit. How's everybody doing? And so I have the pleasure of going after all of this. Right here. Thanks. Appreciate it. We thank you for your support. So, just want to talk to you guys about, you kind of got the overview of slavery in the past, but what people aren't aware of that there is modern day slavery right now as we speak. And just a little quick background on myself. Not only do I work for Black Veterans for Social Justice, which is a veterans organization that helps veterans find housing and employment, so that's a real serious situation. But I also have my own public relations firm. So I deal with the media, I deal with social media on a regular basis. I have clients in all walks of life, from brands to musicians to various companies. And one thing that, for me, that I try to impress upon my clients is that you have to, ignorance is no excuse. Like, in this day and age where we have computers, like she said, where we have libraries, which I still go to the library, and yes, I do have a library card. Absolutely, like that's important, especially as I look out into the crowd and I see young people, and I kind of want to speak to you for a minute, so I'm kind of gonna adjust what I was gonna talk about, because right now I'm really scared for you guys. because the world that we live in right now is really crazy. And if things don't change, then when I'm 65 and I'm 75 and you guys are 20, 21, I don't know what this world is going to be like. Because when we talk about modern day slavery, one of the things that they talked about was the prison system. Please understand, they are banking on you to fail. Absolutely banking on you to fail. You know, I just saw a staggering statistic, and it's in my phone, but there was a study from UCLA, and there was a study saying that there was approximately, like, from 2012, approximately 1.31 million preschoolers or students were suspended from school. That's a staggering number. Like, just put that into context. So, meaning, a lot of times what happens is that we understand that education is really important. So if you started at the basic level, you're in preschool. How are you being suspended in preschool? That's mind-boggling. Like, and that all goes back to, okay, the black dynamic and family homes and things of that nature, and that's a whole different topic. But the reason why I wanted to reach out to you guys is because I need you to understand that to the prisons, you equal $. That's what it is. Like, people don't understand that there's two separate types of jails. There's public and there's private. Private jails are different in the sense that they get paid big bucks for you. So they're banking on you to mess up. They're banking on you not to go to school and to get an education and to be all that you can be. Because to them, that's a $. And what happens is that, and one of the facts that I read was that, it says, in 2015, studies conducted by the University of Wisconsin discovered inmates in for-profit prisons are likely to serve 2 to 3 months longer than inmates in public prisons, with no charges and recidivism, despite profit industry claims for rehabilitation programs. So what that means is that if you get sentenced to a private prison, chances are you'll be there, your stay will be extended. And a good friend of mine, she works in the Baltimore prison system. She's an educator. And she said that the problem is that a lot of youth are coming through there because one of the things that was on the screen was that I am in agreement that they should raise the age of youthful offenders. Because honestly speaking, if you really think about it, if you're like 17 or even 18, you really haven't lived life yet. You've only been in this world for 18 years. And a lot of times what happens is some of the smallest crimes that some of these young people are being convicted of are becoming, once they're young, so they haven't really been in the world, they might have been in the wrong situation, at the wrong time, so they wind up getting incarcerated, so now they're catching additional charges while they're in prison. Thus, the 3 to 4 month extra stay. So I really implore you guys to really be about your education. And for me, working in public relations, I'm a form of an education. I have 1 degree, so shout out to Lincoln University. I got to give the HBCU some love, and it's interesting, and it's serious, like, because I come from both sides. Initially, I'm from Queens, New York, not too far from here. I live in Brooklyn now. But growing up, I went to Springfield Gardens High School, which is not far from here. I guess they changed it. It's like 4 different schools now in there, or whatever. And they just broke it into like a magnet school or something like that, campus school. So long story short, being an athlete, playing basketball, playing football, I had the opportunity to go to a school in Pennsylvania, which was a predominantly white university. And it was culture shock. I was like, wait, time out, what is this? Deer running past, you're in like a real rural town. And one of the first things that happened to me is like, so the campus was like probably 10 or 15 minutes away from like the main town. So you go into the store and blatantly, we went into like this convenience store, and on the counter were cards stating that this gentleman who owned the store was a KKK member. And like, to me, I was just like, wow. So now it's like, okay, I'm coming from nice middle class neighborhood in Queens. I'm going to a Pennsylvania town, and now racism is like smack dab in my face. And having that experience and then going to an HBCU was like a total culture shock, because I experienced so much racism in college and when I was at that university or that junior college. being an athlete, there was only 20 of us there. So I understand what it feels like to really truly be a minority. That college experience pretty much prepared me for the rest of my life. And that opened my eyes to say, okay, listen, the world that we're living in is like much bigger than your little small region or your town. And a lot of times, because we're in the inner cities, a lot of youth don't have the experience of going out of town. I tell you something, which in all honesty, I knew a young man that has never been out of New York City. What do you mean you've never been out of New York? So you've never been to like Sesame Place? You've never been to Great Adventures? No. And what that leads to is, because what happens is now when you have that basic mentality, now you're just trying to scramble to make it. And of course, like, I'm into music, so for me, I love lyrics, and lyrics kind of like tell the story. So it's something that we all know who Jay-Z is, right? Right? We should know who Jay-Z is, right? That's a stupid question. All right, I'm just asking the question. Okay. So there's a song that was on his first album called "Can I Live," and some of the lyrics, and also I do recommend that you guys read. But he does have a book that he wrote like a couple of years ago, and which is a really great book because it kind of breaks down, what he was thinking when he was talking about lyrics. So one of the lines that he had, like, kind of the opening statement, it says, we hustle out of a sense of hopelessness, sort of a desperation. Through that desperation, we become addicted. And that line right there kind of like summarized what the struggle is in the community. The reason why we still have a form of slavery now is because our mental mindset, we're not thinking big picture. We're thinking about here and now. We're thinking about keeping up with the Joneses. We're thinking about maxing out our credit card so we can look good to keep up with our neighbors. That's a form of slavery, getting you to think and have you living outside beyond your means, so that way now you're in debt. And then once you owe somebody, it's a form of slavery. You're a slave to your credit card. You're a slave to that financial institution that owns your debt. All right? Besides, not only with that, that's just the financial aspect. Education is super important. Once you guys educate yourself, you are truly free. Because knowledge is power. And once you know, then you're able to do anything you want in this world. So if I can tell you guys anything, read, study, go to school. That will break the chains of the mental slavery that we still have today. Because a lot of people are walking around zombies. Like, you watch that show Walking Dead. That's how people are walking around nowadays. They're zombies. They don't know what's going on in the world around them. If they owe you debt, they own you. If you don't have property, get equity. That is so important. This year, I'm so happy I'm going to be a homeowner. Right? I'm going to own my house. Okay? Stop renting. Stop renting. That's another way that they get you to be systematically conditioned. Just think about it. Rent in Brooklyn, I'm gonna say what I was paying. No, all right.